because it has a very nice environment. You're in a place that's over 100 years old, and hopefully it'll keep on staying here. And so we are today going to have our wonderful conversation about nurturing. And I've asked Brenda Boozer, who was our very famous Metropolitan Opera singer at the Met, that's a soloist, and I figure she might as well introduce Amy. They're close friends, and why not?
And I don't sing, and you might be able to rub off on me.
Thank you. First of all, speaking from all of us, Dale, Mrs. Coudert, thank you for sharing this beautiful home with us. We could be in an auditorium. We could be in a stuffy place, and she's opened her home. Sunday was music in her living room, the concerts and the garden and the talks. So, Mrs. Coudert, thank you that we are all here. Of all the great philosophers in the world and thinkers, I can't think of a better quote today than James Joyce, who says, "Love loves to love love." And that's today's program. We are exploring the power of love, the potential of love. We have two great speakers. I'm going to introduce Amy, which is my delight, and Melody and Sam Katz have brought Dr. Stixrud, and Sam will introduce Bill. Just tell you quickly our speakers. Stixrud, New York Times bestseller, clinical neuropsychologist, George Washington University School of Medicine. And Amy, my wonderful job to introduce you. Author, educator, advocate. She has her BA in child psychology and early childhood education from Hamilton College. She has written 3 books, You Are My World, The Inner World of Farm Animals, and Shaped by Love, which she will share with us today. And all of this is about the James Joyce quote. So Amy, I introduce you.
Thank you, Brenda. And my sentiments to Dale also, who has just really changed the face of Palm Beach and given us all so many gifts. It's a different place, you know, because of Dale. And she's, there's seats, hi Denise, yeah. Sorry. And so I can't thank Brenda, I can't thank Brenda enough, and I can't thank Dale enough for this opportunity to speak. And again, for all that Dale has done for all of us. And I think in addition to being a trailblazer, I think Dale is kind of a universal mother. She's got really wide arms. I feel like she just embraces you and wants to make sure somebody has someplace to go for Thanksgiving, whatever. She is sort of our divine mother. And Dale, I can't thank you enough for that. You make my family in New York feel much better knowing that you're here, that I'm not alone. Okay. All right, so we've had a couple of technical difficulties, so I'm going to pretend that I'm playing a video which is about how love makes the world go round, and you can all sort of feel it, and I'll try to reveal it to us. But this is my favorite topic. I've been studying babies since I was probably 16. I am obsessed with what babies need for optimal development, and I've always felt that child development was one of the best kept secrets in America. We tend to raise babies based on, you know, maybe how we were raised, you know, our religion, our culture, or the developmental theory of the moment. But today there is this explosion in the science. And so researchers can now see, tests can show the impact that different kinds of experiences have on different areas of the brain. And what we're learning, and they can show how the brain develops. So what we're learning is that relationships shape the brain, and that hugs, kisses, smiles, holding, touching, all of these one-to-one simple acts between parents and children shape the optimal brain. That those kinds of interactions, eye-to-eye contact, just attuned, sensitive responses will lead to optimal development socially, emotionally, cognitively, physiologically, psychologically, immunologically, just you name it. Nature was brilliant, and just that one-to-one is extraordinary. And we're learning that babies are born with hundreds of billions of brain cells. but only a small percentage are connected. About 25% are connected, and those connections happen through the everyday give and take, serve and return of the interactions between parents and children. And there's so much information on the impact that nurturing interactions will have on the trajectory of a baby's life, and it will increase the likelihood of positive outcomes throughout life. The only issue, we have so many ideas about parenting, and I'm trying to bring science into the nursery. For example, how many of us were taught you'll spoil the baby if you pick them up when they cry? I imagine most people heard that. And when we don't soothe babies, they do not become wired to soothe themselves. When we don't soothe them, they are releasing the stress hormones into their system, cortisol and other stress hormones. And as they go through life, they don't have the equipment they need to manage their stress. And there's a woman that I love in England, Margot Sutherland, and she said babies can be and live in hormonal heaven or hormonal hell. And when they're nurtured and loved and hugged and kissed and blessed, they feel good about themselves, they develop confidence, compassion, generosity towards others, they are better problem solvers. The list of what happens when we soothe babies is very long. And honestly, I have a special style. I try to simplify the information so that parents of all backgrounds can understand it. So I use images and captions, and I've started using music to really let all of this enter the heart. And so I wanted to be able to speak to a teenage parent, a teenage dad, any age, any culture. So if I had the slides up, I'd be showing you some pages of the book where it's an image of a baby with a caption, "Just being with you builds my mind." There are 300 pages worth of these kinds of images and messages. But I think that, we have a very great opportunity right now as we commit ourselves to understanding what babies need. We tend to underestimate the capacities, for example, of newborns and even fetuses. We're now learning of the consciousness that's going on in the womb, and why we should talk to babies while in the womb. Their brains are firing. Babies make 1 million neuronal connections a second, and 90% of development happens in the first 3 years of life. So that is the time, we used to think, I think prior to language, not much was going on in those brains. So much is going on. And if I were to read to you, share with you some of the things that newborns are capable of doing, and I just will read a few. They're very social. They're seeking contact and communication with their parents from the start. They can understand grammar by 15 months. They're being referred to as universal perceivers, as they're wired to learn every language at birth, the capacity which fades if not used. They can distinguish their native language from a foreign one just days after birth, detect a missing beat and a musical pattern. I mean, I think whatever information we have that can help us wake up to the capacities of children. On the flip side, we often overestimate what toddlers can do, for example. How many toddlers get punished because they don't share, they don't wait their turn, they can't control their impulses. And if we understood that at birth, the primitive brain is in control, and that loving, nurturing interaction with the parents is going to wire the higher brain. And so I think, this is my main, cause in life, is to let people, really raise awareness of what we can expect when, to change the myths. And I'm going to ask Bill, because we're sharing the time. I'm not looking at a watch, so could you just tell me what time it is?
Oh, 11:45.
Yeah. 11:45. Okay. All right, great. So, yes, so I, as I said, I wish I had the slideshow, but so basically, what we're doing is calling. You can't hear me? Louder. Okay. Not working? It's not working? Huh? Oh, well, okay, it's recording. Okay, so we're good? All right, one thing I'd like, only, not sharing, it's just disappearing. Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, I'm going to just read a few of the things that, simple gestures, lifelong benefits. When we respond to babies with sensitivity and consistency, we're wiring them with peace, compassion, generosity, kindness, and caring about others. Nurturing can help babies think more clearly, reason, and problem solve. There's a study that babies who were well nurtured by their mothers, the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory, stress management, is 10% larger in babies who've been well nurtured. The parental warmth has been found to even eliminate the impact that growing up in an adverse community or adverse conditions can have on the brain. It can really protect the developing brain. It can change genetics. I'm just making a case for love. I could go on and on, but there are a million reasons to love, whatever that comment was. The premise of my book is, there's a quote by Dr. Charles Raison, a child psychiatrist, and he said, just one generation of deeply loving parents could change the brains of the next generation, and with that, the world. And the science backs that, because we really can wire babies for peace, for happiness. When I was reading, that stress, the stress hormones, and that babies aren't getting enough opioids. That without the lack, we can wire babies to feel good on their own. If without enough love and hugs, they're not producing those kinds of hormones. So I would say from every angle, and I'm looking, are you a father by any chance? How old are your kids?
22 and 18.
Okay, great, okay. But I want to say, because I saw you really engaging and responding, that's great. But there is so much research now. Fathers are not just another pair of hands. Fathers are as important in every way and bring very unique capacities as in parenting. And actually, let's see if I can, on every level. When fathers are involved, their children learn more, perform better in school, exhibit healthier behavior. Children whose fathers are involved in their daily care tend to be more confident and develop stronger social connections. The rough play that fathers have help children regulate their feelings and behavior. It goes on every level, the importance of father love. And I've seen a huge change in the involvement of fathers. Have other people noticed it? I mean, it's just amazing. Dads taking their kids to school, doing the diapers. In the 1950s, the average amount of time a father spent with a baby under 3 was 2.6 minutes. So we can see that we've really made progress. I guess I'm going to ask if there are any questions before I turn over to Bill. Does anybody have a question or two? Or yes? Oh, no.
So
Okay.
why is this a lifelong passion of yours? What's up with that?
Oh, wow. Well, I get asked that a lot, and finally, I think what happened, I was left in the hospital when I was born for 3 weeks. My mother had postpartum. They thought I was going to dehydrate. I think what happened to me is I have an implicit memory of the cries of the babies in the intensive care. So I was never able to, I had to answer the cry. Like if I was in a supermarket, I'd had to go back of the supermarket and, soothe that child. And everything I ever wrote was about what can we do for the children. I think it was because I was on some level in touch with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm a grandmother, and I was visiting my son in Canada. His wife is Chinese, he is European, and I brought my kids up that if they cry at night, let them cry, and they learn after a week. Well, they're the whole family around. If the baby cries at 3 in the morning, and they take it in their bed and they pamper it. So they say otherwise it gets an emotional complex if you don't do that.
Well, when we soothe babies, we're really wiring them and teaching them how to soothe themselves. And we're wiring them to release hormones with feelings of well-being, happiness, joy. So soothing is very important. Too much cortisol, it can undo the brain architecture. So it can actually shrink the brain. Too many stress hormones. And I remember I was going to Holland to the Mother Divine, I don't know if Kim is here, talk. And on the way I was hearing about this soccer player who kept biting his, Suarez or something, he kept biting his opponents. And I thought, oh my God, he didn't get enough soothing. So I started to look at the world, through that lens. And I was interviewed recently, we talked about how Putin certainly didn't get hugged. Rob Reiner did something on ABC with Carl Reiner years ago when they looked at world leaders and wanted to know what the level of nurturing was. And somebody said, Hitler, oh, never hug, never touch. Gandhi, hug, schmug, they never took him out of diapers. You know, so, so we have peace and violence, war and peace. And, you know, so I think I'm going to turn things over here. Oh, question, okay. Okay, whoever was first, I wasn't, yes. Sam.
You describe the nurturing between parents and children. Doesn't the same apply to adults?
Well, I think it can, I think being loved by somebody else creates all kinds of feel-good feelings, you know. I think a lot of the wiring has already happened, a lot of the synapses has already formed. But yes, and that's not my expertise. Maybe it will be yours, Faith, who's writing a book about nurturing as well. But it can't hurt, and I think it helps tremendously, you know. I was talking to a grandfather who was telling me how he feels this release. Whenever he's with his granddaughter, he has some amazing release, and I have to look into that more. I think it's love is powerful.
That's your next book.
Yes, hi.
Now I have a question. There are two questions I have, but the major one in my mind is the effect of the telephone and the computers and TV.
In the womb even, you mean?
And also the use of it by so many of the young people to quiet their children.
I might, you know, I haven't paid, that's just not my passion, you know, what the electronics are doing. And Bill knows a lot about a lot of things, and maybe that question. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm here just to ask one question.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm interested in nursing and breastfeeding. I'm a proponent of that, but in the data, so it doesn't seem to match up that the nurturing that children receive by breastfeeding necessarily correlates with either long-term intelligence, long-term psychological well-being, or any of those factors. And I'm wondering if you have any specific insight.
You know, I haven't dug deep specifically into breastfeeding. I mean, just intuitively, I think it's a fabulous experience, and I'm sure there are benefits. How far they go, you know, I can't quantify, you know, but we could talk about it more later. Yeah, yeah. And there was a question over here? Okay, well then I think, thank you for being such a receptive audience, and I'm going to turn it over to Sam, who's going to tell us about Dr. Stickroot, who is a gift to us all as well.
Melody over there, she probably rang a bell when you were talking about toddlers because she thought, that sounds like my husband. Toddler's brain. It's my great pleasure to introduce Bill Sticksroot, William R. Sticksroot, PhD. He's a clinical neuropsychologist and founder of the Sticksroot Group. It's the largest psychological practice in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. As well, he's a faculty member at Children's National Medical Center and an assistant professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the George Washington University School of Medicine. Dr. Sticksroot is the co-author with Ned Johnson of the national bestseller, The Self-Driven Child, and of their new book, What Do You Say? Talking to Kids to Build Motivation, Stress, Tolerance, and a Happy Home. Dr. Sticksroot's work has been featured in media outlets such as NPR, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, Time Magazine, Washington Post, Times of London, Wall Street Journal, U.S. News and World Report, Scientific American, Business Week. I think that covers every magazine I've ever heard of, and New York Magazine. He's a longtime practitioner of transcendental meditation, and Dr. Sticksroot plays in a rock group, and it's a cover band. They play other people's songs, and the name of his group is Close Enough. So it is, I remember the first time I heard about Dr. Sticksroot, I was giving a talk in Bethesda, Maryland, and somebody said, do you know Dr. Sticksroot? And I said, I'd heard the name. I said, well, what's your question? He said, can you get me an appointment? I said, well, did you call the office? And he said, Yeah, it's 2 years to be an Anyway, please welcome Dr. Stixford.
Thank you, Sam. Amy, I just love that stuff. The Dalai Lama once said that the basic nature of, what's that? The basic nature of human beings is love. He said, if you don't believe it, what do infants need? Do infants respond to discipline? All they respond to is love. It's so profound. Yeah. So I'm a neuropsychologist, and I make a living by testing kids, and I have for 40 years now. I test kids if they have learning problems or attention problems or emotional problems or social problems, and I try to figure out what's wrong and what's right and how to help them. And I never get tired of it, in part because I love what kids say. And in the 3 years before the pandemic, I saw these 3 kids, all of whom had autism, and they're sitting across my desk, and they look over to their left and they see a picture of me in a tuxedo and my daughter in a wedding gown. And all 3 kids said, "You got married?" I said, "Yeah, I did 40 years ago. That's me at my daughter's wedding." And all 3 kids said with disgust in their voice, said, "You married your daughter?" So I'm going to pick up a little bit on what Amy was talking about, but I'm going to come back to it. Because my main mission is in my work, since we wrote our 2 books, is to help parents understand that they don't need to be afraid. They don't need to be worried so much about their kids, and they don't need to. That's about as guys. That's about. Just about. Yeah. Does it feel like I'm shouting now?
No.
Okay. Okay. I'll shout. Okay. It feels like I'm shouting, but okay. So the basic idea is that the most important thing for little kids is what Amy is talking about. It's that connection with the parent. And I'll tell you that the closest thing to a silver bullet protecting kids of any age from emotional problems is a loving relationship, really close connection with the parent, or a grandparent. I mean, we asked, in writing our second book, we asked dozens of teenagers, who do you feel closest to on this planet? And some of them said, my mom or my dad. Many of them said, a teacher or my older cousin or an older uncle or a grandparent. And I asked them, what is it about this person that makes you feel so close to them? And they said, they listen to me without judging me, and they don't tell me what to do. And it's beautiful because we know that the keys, as kids get older, the keys to developing that close emotional connection are empathy and validation. And empathy is that that sounds really hard to me. That sounds like that's really upsetting. And the validation is, I think I'd feel like that too if that happened to me. And there's a whole science of how you talk with it works with anybody, with kids, to express this. My first impulse, if you're upset, or just to understand, seek first to understand as opposed to judge, because we're wired as mammals, we're wired to protect and to soothe our young. And so if a kid has a problem, we're wired to say, well, you need to do this or this or this. But when a kid's upset, that doesn't soothe them. What soothes them is empathy, is being understood and being validated. So in our new book, we start our book about building close connection, because that's as close as you get to a silver bullet for protecting kids from the harmful effects of stress. And so the connection is huge, and the 2 keys are empathy and validation. I'll give you an example. We were talking about this in Palo Alto before the pandemic, and a woman sent an email to the woman who organized the lecture and said, I was listening to these guys talk last night, and I went home, and my 7th grade son came up to me and he said, he's crying, he said, Mom, I'm the weakest kid in 7th grade. And he said, ordinarily, that couldn't be true, or you're good at so many things. We're all late bloomers in our family. I would have talked him out of it or tried to make him feel better, and I didn't. All I said is, that sucks. If I wanted to be strong and I was weak, I'd feel terrible about it. And the empathy and validation. And she said, is there a way that I could help? He said, I don't know. So, well, let's sleep on it. The next morning, the kid comes to the mother with a written plan of how to get stronger. And so we want kids to figure things out. But it's that and I got to tell you, this empathy and validation, we're using this reflective listening when somebody's talking about whatever happened to them. Just like, so it sounds, am I getting this right? Somebody calls it wigging. What I got is, from what you just said, is and kind of repeat it back to make sure that we're understanding. And it's that act of being understood that's very healing to people. And so my daughter, who's 41 years old, over the summer was uncharacteristically mad at me and my wife because she thought we'd kept something from us. And so she's mad enough, so that she lives close by, so I drove over to talk to her. And she's mad enough that she met me in the driveway. So I said, tell me, what's going on? And she told me why she was mad. And I'm wired to try to say, well, that's not true, that you understand it wrong. What I said is that if I understood it the way you understood it, I'd be pissed too. I mean, that would make me mad if I felt you intentionally kept stuff from me. I'd be mad too. And I said, however, I see it differently, and if you want to, I'd love to share my angle with you. So she says, okay. So I said, well, we didn't even know until the very last minute. It's not that we knew and kept it from, we didn't know. And within a couple of minutes, we were just laughing about it. But I swear to you, if I tried to talk her out of it, make her wrong, it would have devolved into a big argument, and it's a very powerful tool. And so what I want to say is that the most important thing for babies and for young children is what Amy's talking about. It's that close connection. Now, where most of my work focuses on is as kids get older, the most important thing that we can give them, besides that sense that they're deeply loved, is a sense of control over their own lives. And I got to a sense of control in part through just knowing that the neuroscientists say there's 4 things that make life stressful. And you can summarize it with the acronym NUTS. And it's the idea of stress makes you nuts kind of idea. It's novelty, unpredictability, perceived threat, and a low sense of control. And it's that low sense of control that's the most stressful thing in the universe, because you can be in a new situation or an unpredictable situation, even a potentially threatening situation, but if you feel, I can handle this, it's not very stressful. Because when you have a sense of control, something stressful happens, you activate your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that can think and be flexible. And when that happens, it dampens down the stress response so that you can go into coping mode. So if something stressful happening and you feel like you're coping with it, it's just not that stressful. It's when something stressful happens and nobody knows what to do. That's the most stressful thing in the universe. And my co-author and I, Ned Johnson, we're paying attention to this idea that we have this epidemic. Some of you may know, we have this epidemic, unprecedented levels of depression, anxiety, self-harm, substance abuse in young people, including, and I will tell you that young people from affluent families who attend high-achieving schools are at a particular, they're a risk factor in themselves because their rates of depression and anxiety and substance use disorder are much higher than middle-class kids, even in the mid-20s. And the idea, the basic explanation, is they get excessive pressure to excel, and they don't feel as close to their parents on average. So this is the challenge that we have, and most of the speaking I do around the country, around the world, is with really high-achieving communities. And it turns out that excessive pressure to excel is the 4th leading cause of mental health problems in young people, behind poverty, trauma, discrimination, those 3. It's 4th, excessive pressure to excel. So the idea is that the sense of control is hugely related to all these stress-related mental health. These are all stress-related mental health problems. They're caused by stress, that they cause disruption in the stress systems of the brain. And also, so many kids that I work with who have learning problems, they have attention problems, they aren't very good students, and by the time they're in 5th grade, they figure, what's the point of trying? And so they just avoid other people's attempts to get them to do stuff, to develop themselves. And some of my co-author is the top SAT prep guy in the DC area. And some of the kids he works with are just obsessively driven. They'd sacrifice anything to get into an elite college. And so the motivation is just not healthy. It's not sustainable, it's not healthy. And every place that Ned and I look to understand how do children, and to turn into the kind of self-driven, kind of self-motivated adolescents and adults, is all through autonomy, that sense of autonomy or that sense of control. And if you look at it, just if you have a sense of control, you have choices in your life. You're in assisted living, and you're asked, do you want to have your visitor come at 2 or 2:30, or do you want to eat lunch at 12 or 10:30, whatever. You see, if you have choice, you'll live longer. In part because we think about this idea of a sense of control in 2 dimensions. One is the subjective sense or agency or autonomy, meaning I'm not helpless, I'm not hopeless, I'm not passive, I'm not resigned, I'm not stuck, and also I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not anxious all the time, I'm not exhausted all the time. So that subjective sense that I'm in charge of my life. And the brain state that supports that is the brain state where the prefrontal cortex, this most recently evolved part of your brain that's right behind the forehead. This is the part of the brain that can plan, it can organize, it can put things in perspective, it can calm yourself down, it goes into the past, into the future, it can remember things and bring them into memory. You start to get a little stressed, you can talk yourself down. So the brain state that supports that sense of control is that the prefrontal cortex is regulating the rest of the brain. If you get too stressed, what happens is the amygdala, this very primitive part of your brain that just senses and reacts to threat. The amygdala is really evolutionary, very, very old. It doesn't think. It just senses anything potentially threatening. And if it senses something threatening, it starts your fight or flight response, your stress response. So the idea is that the best marker, the best neurological marker of mental health in adolescents and adults is how strong are the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And from my sense, so many of the families I work with have the idea that the most important outcome of their kids' childhood and adolescence is where they go to college. And they live like that. They make choices based on that. And my sense is that the most important outcome is sculpting a brain that's healthy, that has that drive to develop myself so I have something useful to offer this world and not just jumping through hoops. And so much of our work is focused on this idea of helping kids and young people develop a healthy sense of control over their own life because it's so hugely related to mental health. And it's hugely related to this healthy self-drive that we want kids to develop so that they're developing themselves so they can contribute to this world. And I'll mention just a couple ideas. We talk about, one of the main ideas that we talk about in both of our books is the idea that as kids get older, we want to think about ourselves as consultants. It certainly is. How many are grandparents? Yeah, and this stuff is so relevant. Just this idea, so many kids, when you say, who do you feel closest to? It's a grandparent. What makes you feel close? They listen to me without judging me, and they don't tell me what to do. It's beautiful. So, but the idea is that we think about ourselves more as kids get older as consultants to the kids whose mission it is to help them figure out what kind of life, who do I want to be? What kind of life do I want? As opposed to saying, here's the hoops you have to jump to. Here's what I expect of you. Like somehow we know who they're supposed to be. And this consultant idea, it has 4 major implications. One is that we want to offer, for kids, we have so much more experience. There's so much wisdom, and we want to offer it, but we don't want to force it down their throats. Ned has this great cartoon. It's this guy who has his 2 sons by the nape of the neck. He says, listen up, boys, and listen up good, because I'm only going to tell you this 1,000,000 times. And we're suggesting alternatives to that. Like saying, I got an idea about that. Can I run it by you? For whatever it's worth, I wonder what would happen if you did it this way. And when I want to give advice to kids, I always say, for whatever it's worth, I was thinking, just like I want to make it tentative so it doesn't feel like I'm forcing something on them. So we offer help and advice. We don't try to force it. The second is that we want kids, as much as possible, to make their own decisions, because that's how they become a good decision maker. And the third thing is, as much as possible, we want them to solve their own problems. Really, the basic research on attention control. Steve Mayer, the University of Colorado, done this work for 40 years. Rat A and rat B. And rats' brains are organized a lot like our brains. We can learn quite a lot from it. Rat A and rat B. They're in a plexiglass cage. Their tails are outside of the cage with a little electrode on it. There's a wheel in the cage. Rat A gets shocked in the tail. And it's not painful, but it's annoying, and he wants it to stop. So he discovers if he turns the wheel, the shock stops. He has this experience several times where he gets shocked, the prefrontal cortex activates to go into coping mode, he turns the wheel, and as he's turning the wheel, the stress level goes down because he's coping. He's not overwhelmed, he's not freaking out. And so he becomes what the researchers call a California laid-back rat, because he becomes impossible to stress as he gets as an adult rat. Rat B gets shocked, turns the wheel, and nothing happens. Rat A learns, I can handle stressful situations. So you disconnect the wheel from the shocking apparatus, and still, Rat A gets shocked, he just turns that wheel, stress level goes down, no big deal. It's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. Rat B becomes so easily stressed, develops all these stress-related problems. And so what we want is, as much as possible, and with love and support, is for kids to learn to solve their own problems. Because it's that experience of something stressful happens, going into coping mode and solving it, figuring it out, that's what builds confidence that I can handle hard stuff, right? I mean, if you don't, now, I was in Houston lecturing a couple years ago, well, before the pandemic, and I happened to mention the most elite high school in Washington, D.C. And this woman came up to me after the lecture and said, I'm a therapist here at the Manager Clinic in Houston, this really prestigious mental health place. Said, we know this independent school in D.C. really well, because so many kids get into the top colleges in the world, but they can't handle it. As soon as they find out that everybody's there as smart as they are, as soon as they get a B, or as soon as their girlfriend dumps them, they can't handle it emotionally, and so they come here they take a medical leave of absence, and they come here for treatment. And she said, to the one, they simply don't have enough experience running their own lives, making their own decisions, solving their own problems. And so the three questions for me in child rearing, and I'll tell you, it's probably, raising children now with the digital technology you're asking about is probably more stressful than ever before. But I will say that 35 years ago, I tested this kid whose mother was a humorist. And she said, we shouldn't call it raising children, we should call it lowering parents. for obvious reasons, right? Yeah. So I think that so we talk about this idea of being a consultant, and it's not intuitive to everybody. This one mother of a kid I tested, when she read our book when it first came out, she sent me an email. She said, for the chapter, the title of the chapter on this parent as consultant idea is called, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And the idea is that, obviously, I couldn't make you do it. Fighting about it every single night, that's so toxic. I love you too much to do that, but I'm willing to help you any way I can. I'm willing to be your homework consultant if you need me, that kind of idea. I'm willing to offer, I offer every help, all the help you need, but I'm not going to force it on you, that kind of idea. So this mother emails me after she read the book, and she said, I just told my 8th grade son, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And first he smiled, and then he hugged me, and then he said, is something wrong with you, Mom? So we also talk about this idea. What time is it? Anybody know?
12:15.
Okay, so we talk about this idea of a non-anxious presence. And I didn't make this idea, I wish I did. I got it from a family therapist and consultant by the name of Edwin Friedman, who said basically that systems, ranging from organizations, ranging from families to corporations, they function best if the people in charge can serve as a non-anxious presence who are not overly anxious and emotionally reactive. And you think about it, as a parent, a grandparent, you got a baby crying, it's a lot easier to soothe them if you stay calm. If you got a 3-year-old tantruming in the store, it's a lot easier to handle it if you stay calm. And so the idea is that we want parents to think about, I'm moving in the direction of being a non-anxious presence in my family. The idea is we want home to be a safe base. I mean, the world is stressful enough. And so many kids that Ed and I, my co-author and I work with, it's something, they get a B on something or they got in trouble or something. Don't tell my parents, they'll kill me. And ideally, we bring a kid brings a problem to a parent or a grandparent, and we're less upset than the kid is, so that we can listen, we can use empathy, we can say, is there a way that I could help, or you want my ideas about that? Like that. So this non-anxious presence idea, the most important, maybe the most important way that parents can move into this, in this direction is taking a long view, because this prefrontal cortex, it ain't fully mature. The cognitive functions ain't fully mature until 25 plus minus 3. The emotional regulation functions not mature till 32 plus minus 3. And I can't tell you how many, I got a Christmas card from this family a couple years ago, and on the outside it said, "You were right." And I open it up, it's these 3 siblings with their spouses. And the card said, they all turned out great. And they wrote this elaborate note about and I'd followed these kids in the 1990s and into the early 2000s. And they're all a hot mess at various times. And one of them flunked out of college at least twice. And they're all successful lives. And they said, "You were right. You kept telling us that this prefrontal cortex is so slow to development. You never give up on a kid. There's always room for hope." And the second, and certainly we talk a lot about meditation in both of our books, in part as a tool for helping to be a non-anxious presence. And so many of the parents I know who learn to meditate, one of the first things they say is, my kids did something I would have ordinarily been so mad about. It just wasn't that upsetting to me. I think I was more helpful to them. And a lot of kids, if their mom gets mad at them, say, "Mom, did you miss your meditation today?" And I know this family in New York, Sam and Melanie. You may know them too, but it's a mom and a 17-year-old kid with autism, and they learn TM, Transcendental Meditation, and the mom is very well connected and got a reporter from the New York Times to come and write a story about the family. And the reporter asked the kid, "So what do you notice from the meditation?" It said, "TM calms the mind and it calms the mom." Moving in that direction to being a non-anxious presence, you see. So we talk about that. We have a chapter in our first book about what we call radical downtime. And the idea is that life now for young people particularly is so fast-paced and so stressful that we used to think about I play golf or I knit or I garden, but we need more radical downtime. Radical downtime meaning where it looks like you're just wasting time, but what you're doing is incredibly important. And the 3 categories, the 3 things that fit in this category are sleep, daydreaming, simply just having time to mind. There's a lot of concern. The young people who are constantly stimulated electronically, they don't have enough time to reflect on their own life. And we know that just being in your own head, hugely related to creativity, to problem solving. In young people, enormously related to the development of empathy and to the development of a coherent sense of identity. You have to have time to just kind of reflect on your life to figure out, who am I? Who do I want to be? If I say something mean to you, I need time to reflect on that, to develop empathy and understand that's not what I want to do, like that. So we talk about this radical downtime, and it's a nice idea, and we don't want to overprogram kids. If I could do one thing, if I could do 2 things that would completely transform the mental health landscape of young people, it would be let them sleep, to get enough sleep, and have them practice TM, Transcendental Meditation. And I'll tell you, the last thing I'll mention is that also, on another visit to Houston, I asked this group of very high-achieving student government leaders in high school, I said, "What do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult?" And this one kid kind of sheepishly raised, "Well, we understand that if we get into a good enough college, everything is set." And I'm going, "Oh God, how could they be?" And Laurie Santos is a psychology professor at Yale. And she for years, she lived in and she may still, but for years she lived in residential dormitories with Yale undergraduates. And what she was so struck by was these kids had gotten themselves into arguably the most prestigious university in the world, and they are miserable. She said they're so unhappy that they're sleeping 4 to 6 hours a night. They're chronically stressed and pressured. They don't enjoy anything about being at Yale. And so she started teaching the first course at Yale on the science of happiness, the science of well-being. And 20 years ago, a psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman, who did some of the early work on a sense of control, he said, psychology just studies misery. Let's start studying happy people and figure out what they're like. And so he created this whole field of positive psychology. And so she teaches this course on positive psychology, the science of happiness, basically. And it quickly becomes the most popular course in the history of Yale University. Because young people grow up, so many, especially in high-achieving schools and affluent communities, they grow up believing that the most important thing is where you go to college. And actually, the research on it says that for this population, that it matters virtually nothing where you go to college in terms of how successful you are, has no relationship at all with happiness, with relationships. The famous Harvard study of men for what's gone on for like 90 years, the most predictive variable for predicting longevity and satisfaction in life was relationships. You know, as one of my colleagues says, it makes much more difference who you marry than where you go to college. And so part of my mission, and Ned's mission, is to help people get a more accurate model of reality. That the reality is that Martin Seligman's formula for happiness he summarizes it with the acronym PERMA, and it's positive emotion. And there's some genetic, it's not huge, but there's some genetic limitations on positive emotion. You know, some people are born a little bit more glass half empty, glass half full, but there's a lot you can do. If you're on that more glass half empty, you can exercise. You know, you can do therapy. You can meditate. There's a lot of things you can do to elevate your emotion. So it's positive emotion. It's deep engagement, what they call the flow experience so you're deeply engaged in something that you care about, that's not easy and it's not hard, but it requires your full energy, your full attention, your full effort. It's the kind of thing where you can be, I get this playing music all the time, where it feels like an hour's gone by and it's been 3.5 hours. I had no idea, where it's completely absorbed. That's the E. So it's positive emotion. The E is engagement. The R is relationships. The M is meaning. And the A is accomplishment or achievement. So it's not that achievement is trivial. It's important, but it's 1/5 of the formula. And this, so we wrote, in our new book, we have a chapter called Talking with Kids About the Pursuit of Happiness, to give them a broader understanding, really, of what it takes to create a life. Our lecture for young people is called Creating a Life That You're Happy With. Because so many people we see who are highly successful financially, career-wise, are miserable. And we want people to be able to sculpt the brain as they're growing up. That's not, I forgot to tell you one thing. If a kid develops anxiety, or a teenager, an anxiety disorder or depression, it doesn't doom them, but it changes the brain in a way that makes them more vulnerable to being depressed or having periods of depression or being anxious as they get older into adulthood. And so we want to prevent, as much as we can, prevent these kind of problems, starting with the very early stuff that you were talking about, Amy. Because we want to do that because it changes the brain. And so we want kids to understand that I want you to work hard. I want you to be as successful as you want to be. But I want you to have a brain that's going to be capable of enjoying your success. So that's mainly what we talk about. And I'll also tell you, how many practice meditation? I'll tell you my favorite TM story. Yeah. So my favorite meditation story, I did, with a colleague of mine, I did 2 studies on middle school kids practicing transcendental meditation. The kids had ADHD, attention problems. They were practicing transcendental meditation in school 3 months, 15 minutes twice a day. And we got beautiful data. Fred Travis did brain EEG studies, got beautiful changes in brainwave activity. And in the first study, we interviewed the kids and just asked them, what do you notice from meditation? And they all said, I'm much less anxious. Most of them said, I'm better organized, I can do my homework more by myself. And this one kid who was wildly impulsive said, before I started meditating, if I was walking in the hall and somebody bumped me, I just turn around and hit him. Now that I've been meditating though, if I'm walking in the hall and somebody bumps me, I stop and think, should I hit him or not? So I'll stop there.
I worry about marijuana, and you talked about the development of the brain up until 25, which is yes or no. and
Can you
so
repeat the
much,
question?
so much.
I'll repeat it.
She'll repeat it. I can't talk so loud, I'm sorry. But I worry so much that there is more marijuana that appears in New York City, because I live in New
Oh,
York
God.
City. It's around our country. The parents are smoking marijuana. We have to think about this effect on our society.
So the question is about marijuana and how prevalent it is and possible effects on young people's development. And I will say that many of the young people I work with, particularly teenagers, smoke pot and to deal with stress and anxiety. And mainly what they say, I mean, this is, in essence, they don't say this exactly. In essence, what they're saying is that I don't worry about all the stuff I don't worry as much about all the stuff I don't do, I don't accomplish, you know. And so what I tell kids is that we probably in my practice, we say about 2 kids a year who go off to college, commonly in their sophomore year. They're heavy pot smokers, and they have a psychotic break. They lose touch with reality. They're hospitalized, and they come for my office for evaluations. And the association with psychosis is pretty strong. The other thing I tell young people is that if you smoke pot, some people get panic on pot. It's not, but for a lot of people, they do worry less. But it makes you more anxious when you aren't high. It actually makes you more anxious because you don't develop coping mechanisms. My brother-in-law was the first person I ever knew. This is like probably 1980. He did an inpatient treatment program because he'd been smoking pot since he was 15 and he couldn't stop, and it scared him. He did an inpatient program, and the therapist said, you know, you're 25 chronologically, you're 15 emotionally, because you haven't felt your feelings in the last 10 years, and that's the way you grow up. That's the way you grow up emotionally. And so I share your concern, and the idea that we know, I mean, it's hard to, you can't really study this in a satisfactory way, because you can't take 15-year-olds and assign half of them to a pot-smoking group, and you can't do it. So you can't really do a controlled study like that. And when you look at kids who start smoking a lot of pot when they're 14 or 15, they have a lot more problems, but there's a reason that they started smoking pot at 14 or 15. So I share your concern. The idea that this is just I think it's the THC that seems to be most as opposed to the CBD. So I think it's complicated. But I share also the idea, I just tell kids, look at, why don't you do something that's going to make you feel much more relaxed and calm and happy, that's actually good for your brain, that doesn't screw up your working memory. It really improves your attention. So I do this, that's kind of how I sell the meditation. Yeah.
Hey, Del.
Yeah.
So thank you, first of all.
Oh, yeah.
And then the tools you're providing and your advice is all very positive. Let me ask you about a negative thing.
Yeah.
So the consequences of screwing up. So when you're a parent, you've got children, teenagers, what have you.
Yeah.
How do consequences that are negative help the situation? If this doesn't happen, then I'm sorry, lovingly, but if this doesn't happen, if that goes poorly, then this is the outcome. How do you use negative
Yeah.
consequences?
So, I mean, the most common negative consequence is, I'm taking away your phone. No matter what it is, I'm taking away your phone. So the idea is this. Here's what I understand. The last chapter, this is so interesting, John, because the last chapter in our new book is called What About Consequences? Because it's so many, when we lecture, people ask this question. And we emphasize in both of our books that this approach, this kind of parent as consulting approach, it's within the tradition of what's called authoritative parenting, as authoritarian, actually, or kind of laissez-faire. The authoritative parenting is that we're the guides in our family, and we work out limits with kids, and we want. But what discipline means, the word discipline itself means to teach. An idea is that we want kids to learn from their experience.
Disciple.
Exactly. And we know that punishment, grounding a kid for 2 weeks, it's just not an effective parenting tool, and it's not necessary. So what we talk about in this chapter on consequences is that ideally, natural consequences are great. Kid leaves his bike out in the rain and it won't work, and he has to pay to get it oiled up or whatever. That's great. And we can, and also, logical consequences are great. So, for example, you work out with your kid that I can't make you brush your teeth, and I'm not going to fight with you about it every night. But if you don't brush, then you kind of work it out with them, and they agree. They'll agree. Then no sweets the next day. That kind of idea. And so, but ideally, the logical consequences are worked out in advance. So because what we know that stress is contagious. Going back to if you got a newborn in your hand, if you're a mother, and you're given a stressful task to do, the mother's stress hormones go up, and so do the baby's. That stress is contagious, but calm is contagious as well. Calm is contagious as well. So we want to, part of the reason that we want to be a non-anxious presence is so that we don't try to impose consequences when we're mad, because we work things out as much as possible ahead of time. When you start kids at their first video games, you have the conversation about let's work out. I mean, I know how much you love this stuff. Kids love this stuff, and I also know that in 2018, 200 psychologists signed a letter addressed to the president of the American Psychological Association, asking them to censure psychologists working in Silicon Valley, knowingly using behavioral and motivational techniques to make these games as addictive as possible. So we had that kind of conversation. So that I want you to be able to enjoy this, and also I want to feel like I'm a decent parent. And if I let you play this thing 6 hours a day, and I couldn't sleep at night, I couldn't live with myself. So that's not going to work. So you work out some kind of, and what happens if we agree this time to this time, and then you put it down, and it's a constant hassle? What would be an appropriate consequence? And actually, kids and teenagers, they're pretty good about it. So, well, how about it? Then I don't use it for a day or 2 days, because the idea is if we take something away or we set some consequence, we don't want it to be a 2-week, you're grounded for a month kind of thing. You always have a chance because so we confuse paying for what you did with learning from what you did.
And now you're connecting the prefrontal cortex with the amygdala. You're getting those things to fire.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and so we want to. I will say I didn't have very hard kids. My kids were pretty easy, but I asked my son a couple years ago, as we were working on a new book. I said, "Do you remember ever being punished or having any consequences?" And he said, "I remember once when I was 10, you gave me a Boy Scout knife and you saw me running with it, and I said, and you said, I think, why don't I keep it for a day? You can kind of think about this a little bit, the safety piece." And then I gave it back to him the next day. That's all I remember. So I know it's possible, but I think that if we think about consequences as punishment, that it's not really effective. If the idea, we want them to learn from their experience. Yeah.
Easier said than done.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Easier said than done.
So all of your thoughts are fantastic and relevant and very important. But how is that communicated to a society where we, as you pointed out, we have a terrible situation with young people, suicides and depression, and it's universally recognized and chronicled all the time. And yet we know the mental health system is broken for affluent people or non-affluent people. And so I just want to know how you as a profession get your wonderful constructive thoughts to a wider audience, because we're living in an era of media that's up against it, all of the social media, and also poverty, and there's so many forces. There isn't even a family in most cases. You talk about love and nurturing and parents and grandparents. Well, most of kids that don't have families, the grandparents do play a very big role.
Huge.
But, these are massive American problems.
Right.
So how is that communicated to be, solve them?
So, could you hear the question? So, here, I'll just tell you my angle on this, what I'm working on, is that I'm just working on an op-ed piece, the premise of which is that we before the pandemic, people are saying, we've never seen anything. A woman wrote an article, a social scientist wrote an article, said, I've studied generational differences my whole career. I've never seen anything like the spike in anxiety disorder, depression, and loneliness in young people as I saw between 2012 and 2017. And she wrote an article in The Atlantic about this, said, has the smartphone destroyed a generation? A little sensationalistic, possibly. But the op-ed, I'm arguing that we have these problems of, also we have that people from kindergarten, teachers from kindergarten to college are saying kids are undermotivated. They just aren't engaged with their learning very like they were before the pandemic. The incidence of these mental health problems has increased by 50% since the pandemic. It's almost impossible where I live, in a suburb of Washington, D.C., to find a therapist for a kid or a psychiatrist for a kid. So your point is beautiful. What I'm working on right now, I'm working with educators who are really into supporting student autonomy. The idea is that schools have the power, because kids are in school 6 hours a day. As they get older, almost all their time is spent either in school or working on school work. Schools have tremendous power by focusing on student autonomy and developing the brain state that supports that autonomy, where the prefrontal cortex stays online and it regulates the rest of the brain. So the two main things are we're focusing on getting schools in high school. One of my colleagues, an educator, studied the manuals of high school manuals in elite schools. What he found was that over 90% is, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to do. 10%, here's a choice you might have. We got to reverse that. And so there's the schools that are focusing on increasing that sense of autonomy. And also, in terms of the brain state, about 6 years ago, I met with people from the U.S. Department of Education about the Quiet Time program, which has brought TM into underserved communities and schools. And I was with a social scientist who told these people at the U.S. Department of Education, he said, I've done dozens of studies trying to reduce stress in young people, and I've reviewed hundreds of studies trying to do the same thing. I've never seen anything come close to what this Quiet Time does in terms of healing kids, in terms of healing schools and communities. So the dual focus for me, number one, is supporting these educators who want to develop student autonomy, give them more control of their lives, which will increase their motivation and make them less stressed and make them less vulnerable to stress-related mental health problems. And then also, where I can, to get to meditation in the schools. When kids do it, it's just, God, I can't tell you. I went to visit the school, one of the first schools in San Francisco where they instituted the Quiet Time program. And it's one of the underserved schools. And I toured, I lectured to the faculty, and I toured before that the school. And the counselor said, the vice principal said, we're walking now past the counselor's office. Now, 2 years ago, before we started this Quiet Time program, there would have been 30 kids out here fooling around, hitting each other, who got kicked out of class and told to go to the counselor. There's not a single kid out of class now. And these kids actually, after 5 years of this program, there's something called the California Happy Kids Survey. This school was reported the highest level of happiness of any school in California, middle school in California. And I remember seeing the videos of these girls, mainly African-American girls, who were part of the Quiet Time program. And what almost all of them said, because they were interviewed, I was watching the videos of their interviews, was that I can sleep through the night for the first time. Because when they learned to meditate, they felt safe enough to fall asleep. And you can't heal anything if you don't sleep. And so these are my two focuses, is on this autonomy, choice, decision-making. This is your life. I want to develop your life. I don't know what's best for you. That's supporting autonomy and encouraging the development of that brain state, that lower stress levels, keeps the prefrontal cortex, regulates your brain, and reduces your vulnerability to mental health problems. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a two-part question about just two things you didn't mention. Do you have any exposure to families, especially since the pandemic, who choose to homeschool instead of the conventional sort of route of education? And secondly, what about families that choose faith or prayer instead of transcendental education?
Well, I don't. For me, it's not an either/or thing. I mean, certainly there's many Christian families who practice meditation, and many of them experience that I'm a better Christian. I'm less reactive. I'm calmer. Okay, but I'm all for it. I'm all for prayer and faith. Now,
Homeschooling?
yeah, I'm a fan of homeschooling. I mean, I think that one of my arguments is that, I mean, I was just reading this article about how that, I can't remember who it was, somebody trying to put pressure on corporations who have these toxic workplaces to heal, to basically make them less toxic. And for many kids, schools are toxic places. I mean, I felt my whole career that because there's so many elite independent schools in the DC area where I live, that they're toxic for 80% of the kids in them. And in the sense that they can't get enough sleep, huge academic pressure, this excessive pressure to excel. I don't see it. I don't see kids from elite schools who don't have anxiety disorders. I mean, or most of them are depressed. I mean, so I think that schools are toxic for a lot of kids. So I'm a fan of homeschooling. And most of the kids that I see, after being homeschooled for a while, I'd say the majority, eventually they want to go to school. They want to play sports. They want to do something like that. But I like the idea. I don't love the idea of homeschooling if it's constantly, you're kind of like cracking the whip, because you really can't make a kid do anything. But I'm a big fan of it. Yeah. Yes.
That film that was out a few years ago, The Social Dilemma,
Yes.
which you touched on a little bit, just what's
Yeah.
happening with mental health, having to do with cell phones and social media.
Yeah.
But the most terrifying part of that film for me was the point that they made that the brain development, the neurons, et cetera, were being permanently, imprinted. I don't have the right words exactly, but by the use of all of the technology, and I wonder if, as a neuroscientist, if you agree with that.
Well, it's really, it's hard to tell. I mean, that the study of video games and social media, it's hard. For example, with most social media, if young people are on it for 30 minutes, that really they feel better. It's relaxing, but if they're longer than that, it's very highly correlated with anxiety disorders and depression. So I think that what I'm most concerned about is all the things they aren't doing, and particularly with young people, with children, because human mammals evolved to play. I mean, all mammals, the young mammals, they play. That's how they learn to be adults. And we've short-circuited play in children dramatically, because by the time that they're 3 now, they're on teams, coach-led teams, or they're in front of a screen. And we know there's no evidence at all that's good for kids, and that not playing is huge. So my feeling, in both of our books, we have chapters on technology. The first book is Taming the Beast of Technology. The second book is called The Hard Ones, because with teenagers particularly, the most hardest one to talk to kids and work out limits, because they feel most strongly about it. So it's sleep and technology. And our angle is that so much of the energy that kids feel from parents regarding technology is get off, shut it down, this is bad, this is bad. And if we do that, we lose our ability to influence kids. So what we want to do is we want there's video games or social media, try to understand what they're doing. And what I encourage kids to do with video games is to watch them play and say, oh my God, you're really good at that. How did you do that? That's so cool. You're playing with your friends. That must be so fun. You use empathy like that. And then you say, that let's figure out, I want you to be able to enjoy this as much as you can. And let's figure out how to kind of make it work for you and make it work for me. Now, in terms of I think that the Netflix documentary, that social media that she's referring to, I know one woman in my practice who watched it with her 15-year-old daughter, who immediately deleted her social media accounts. Because the idea, teenagers don't like to be played. And the idea that these social media companies are figuring out everything, that are showing you stuff just because it's personalized for you. They're trying to sell you stuff. They're trying to hold your attention as long as possible and sell it to the highest bidder. When kids understand that, a lot of them say, that's not for me. I resent that. So, but I don't think that this idea of permanent changes. I mean, you can be stressed for a long time, and if you get restorative sleep, you practice meditation, something that deeply relaxes your mind and body, you can heal almost anything.
I love the idea of sitting there with the adolescent, watching a film like that together, and then letting them problem solve for themselves. Like what you were talking
That's
about
exactly what I
before.
suggest.
That's amazing.
That's that and I just don't try to ram it down this and say, I just want you to watch. Well, let's watch this together.
They're not going to get that their brain's getting rewired. You can't tell them.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
You have one more question.
Okay.
And then we're going to have lunch out here.
Okay. Yes.
Have you had any experience in the use of mushrooms, to alleviate depression?
Personally, I mean, I was raised in the 70s. No, I think that there's a lot of research now on psychedelics in the use of treating depression, treating trauma, and I'm open to it. It's not something that because I work mainly with children and teenagers. It's not something that's happening with young people. So I don't know a lot about it, but I'm open to things that'll help.
Johns Hopkins Hospital
Right.
has just opened a department to study it.
That's right, exactly. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you.